My girlfriend and parents were hiding something from me. Now, the truth came out. I walked away from all of them. I'm 27, and life's always been pretty good to me. I try to stay positive and find humor in everything, something I definitely got from my parents. But all that changed the day I brought my ex-girlfriend Fiona home to meet my family. I met Fiona through mutual friends at a local brewery. From the moment she walked in, I was captivated. She had this magnetic energy about her, the kind that drew people in effortlessly. Her laugh was infectious, and she had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. As an introvert myself, I was amazed by how easily she could connect with anyone and everyone. Our relationship progressed quickly. We shared similar interests in indie movies and obscure bands, and she always seemed genuinely interested in my work as a software developer. Every date with her felt natural, like we'd known each other for years instead of months. Looking back now, I should have realized it was too perfect, too smooth. But when you're falling in love, you tend to ignore the red flags. After 6 months of dating, I decided it was time for Fiona to meet my parents. They lived in another state, about a 3-hour flight away in the small town where I grew up. My parents had always been incredibly welcoming to everyone I brought home. They ran a successful small business in town and were known for their warm hospitality. I'd brought home girlfriends before, and my parents had always been nothing but kind and supportive. I mentioned Fiona to them a few times over our weekly video calls, and they seemed excited to meet her. My mom even asked what kind of food Fiona liked, so she could prepare her favorite dishes. That's just the kind of people my parents were, always going the extra mile to make others feel welcome. Fiona and I flew out to my hometown. We checked into a hotel near my parents' house, and Fiona seemed excited, if a bit nervous. I assured her there was nothing to worry about. My parents were the easiest people in the world to get along with. But the moment we arrived at their front door, everything changed. When my parents opened the door, their usual warm smiles froze on their faces. More surprisingly, Fiona's typically confident completely vanished. The air became thick with tension, and I felt like I was missing something obvious. The dinner that followed was excruciating. My mother tried to break the ice, her voice unusually high-pitched. So, Fiona, James tells us you work in marketing? Yes, Fiona stammered, pushing food around her plate. Digital marketing. Interesting, my father said, his eyes never leaving her face. How long have you been in that field? About 5 years now. 5 years. My father's fork clinked sharply against his plate. That's quite a coincidence. I glanced between them, confused by the underlying tension. Dad, what do you mean? Nothing. Nothing at all. He forced a smile, just making conversation. My mother jumped in with another attempt at small talk. And you've never visited our little town before, Fiona? Fiona's knuckles went white around her water glass. No, never. It's very charming. Really? My mother's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. You look familiar somehow. I just have one of those faces, Fiona replied quickly. Too quickly. Before we'd even finished dessert, Fiona abruptly thanked my parents and practically dragged me out of the house. Back at the hotel, she locked herself in the bathroom, and I heard the unmistakable sounds of her throwing up. When I asked if she was okay, she insisted it was just food poisoning. The next morning, I woke up to an empty hotel room and a text message. Not feeling well. Headed home early. You should stay and enjoy time with your parents. We'll talk when you get back. I was concerned, but figured she must have been really sick to leave without saying goodbye in person. I moved back to my parents' house for the remainder of the trip, but things fell off. My parents, who usually couldn't stop asking about my girlfriends, seemed to avoid discussing Fiona. I caught them both constantly checking their phones, quickly hiding their screens whenever I walked by. When they did ask about Fiona, their questions felt forced, almost rehearsed. Over the next few days, I tried repeatedly to contact Fiona. My calls went straight to voicemail, and my texts received no response. After 2 days of silence, I decided to cut my trip short and head home to check on her. That's when things started getting weird. The day after I returned, I drove past Fiona's apartment building and saw my father's car in the parking lot. I did a double take. There was no mistaking his distinctive vintage Mustang. But how did he even know where she lived? I'd never mentioned her address to my parents. When I confronted Fiona, I just saw my dad. Did he come over here? She denied immediately, no, he's not. Maybe you got the wrong person. But her hands shook as she spoke, and she couldn't meet my eyes. A few days later, I spotted my mother meeting Fiona at a cafe across town. Again, Fiona denied it when I asked her about it. The truth finally started unraveling during a conversation with our mutual friend, Alex. Fiona must be happy to be back in your hometown, they mentioned casually. She always talked about how much she loved it there. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? That was her first time visiting. Alex looked confused and pulled out their phone. No way, she's been there tons of times. Look, here's a picture she took last summer. They showed me a photo of a sunset taken from the hill behind my parents' house, a view I'd grown up with. My mind started racing, connecting dots I hadn't even realized existed. The weird tension at dinner. My parents' strange behavior. Their secret meetings with Fiona. Something wasn't adding up, and I needed answers. I hired a private investigator to dig her past. I felt slightly ridiculous about investigating my own girlfriend, but my gut told me there was more to this story. While waiting for the PI's results, I started doing some digging of my own. That's when I found a Facebook photo from 5 years ago that Fiona had been tagged in. She was at an upscale restaurant, sitting close to a man who looked eerily familiar. My blood ran cold as I realized why. It was my father. The PI's report arrived a few days later, and it was worse than I could have imagined. Over the past 6 years, Fiona had been involved in a pattern of relationships with wealthy individuals, always ending in large money transfers before things fell apart. Among her past relationships were two that stood out: a middle-aged businessman who owned a chain of successful small businesses, and a woman who ran a popular local restaurant. My parents, they had each dated Fiona at different times, neither apparently aware of her connection to the other. Each relationship had ended when they discovered she was seeing other people, but not before they'd given her significant amounts of money. I felt physically sick. The woman I'd fallen in love with had previously dated both of my parents separately and scammed them out of money. And now she was dating me? Was this some kind of twisted revenge? Or was I just the next target in her scheme? I drove straight to my parents' house, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. When I arrived, I laid everything out on their dining room table. The PI's report, the Facebook photos, the bank statements showing their transfers to Fiona. The look of shame on their faces told me everything I needed to know. My mother started crying, explaining how she'd met Fiona at a business conference 3 years ago. They'd had a brief relationship that ended when my mother discovered Fiona was seeing multiple other people. My father's story was similar. He'd met her through a dating app 5 years ago, and she disappeared after he confronted her about her other relationships. Neither of them had known about the other's involvement with Fiona until that dinner 2 weeks ago. They'd both recognized her immediately, but had been too shocked and embarrassed to say anything. Their subsequent secret meetings with her had been attempts to understand what she was doing with me and to warn her to stay away. I left my parents' house that night feeling numb. I blocked Fiona's number and all her social media accounts, but she still found ways to try to contact me. She left voicemails claiming she could explain everything, that she'd changed, that what we had was real. I didn't believe a word of it. The hardest part was dealing with my parents. While I understood they were victims too, I couldn't get past the fact that they'd hidden the truth from me. They should have told me the moment they recognized Fiona. Their shame and embarrassment had allowed this situation to continue far longer than it should have. In the end, I decided I needed a complete fresh start. I quit my job, packed up my apartment, and moved to a different state where nobody knew me. I needed space to process everything that had happened and to rebuild my life without the shadow of this bizarre triangle hanging over me. It's been 6 months since then. I'm slowly starting to date again, though I'm much more cautious now. I've had minimal contact with my parents, just enough to let them know I'm safe. Maybe someday we'll be able to move past this, but for now, the distance feels necessary. As for Fiona, I heard through mutual friends that she's moved on to her next target. Sometimes I'm tempted to warn them, but I know they wouldn't believe me. The story is too incredible. I barely believe it myself sometimes. The whole experience has taught me that you never really know someone, no matter how well you think you do. People can surprise you in the worst ways possible. But it's also taught me about resilience, about the importance of trusting your instincts, and about the strength it takes to walk away from toxic situations, even when they involve the people you love most. I'm still healing, still processing, still trying to understand how I missed so many red flags. But I'm also growing stronger every day, learning to trust myself again, and slowly building a new life where I get to write my own story, one that doesn't include manipulative ex-girlfriends or complicated family dynamics. Sometimes the best endings aren't happy ones. They're just endings that set you free to begin again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.